Welcome to this edition of the Legislative Reference Bureau's Oral History Project. Today we're talking to Ada Deer, a prominent tribal leader in Wisconsin for the past 40 years at least. Ada, let's start with the beginning. I understand you were born on the Menominee Reservation. Can you tell us something about your early years?
My father, a member of the Menominee Indian tribe, a good, excellent speaker of the language. My mother, a white nurse who came there to work in the hospital, which was at that time run by the Catholic nuns, but the expenses were paid for by the tribe. And she came from the Plains. That was her first assignment as a nurse in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. She's a very strong-minded person with strong opinions, and she was totally fascinated by the culture of the Native people that she met out there. This was on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. She went horseback riding with the people. She went to the powwows. She was a friend of people in the tribe. And you were not supposed to fraternize with the natives. This was the early 30s.
Your mother was white and she was not from Wisconsin.
That's right. She came from Philadelphia, a very well-to-do family. And in the times then, there were very few choices for women. First, you could be a wife, preferably a wife. She was born in 1904. So in her early adulthood then, those were the choices. A wife, a teacher, or a nurse. And she and her sister chose to go to nursing school. So she was there. She really enjoyed and respected and really related well to the people there. But she's also strong-minded about the medical practices and so on. And so she got into some kind of a disagreement with them. So they shipped her out to Wisconsin. And here we are. I had two brothers, two sisters, and myself. I was the oldest. We lived in a log cabin on the banks of the Wolf River. It's a beautiful, beautiful area, beautiful reservation. The Menominee Reservation is noted worldwide for its forestry practices. We have the largest land-based tribe in Wisconsin, and that's another long story. We take great pride in our environment, as many tribes do, and she thought this was Ducky, living in a log cabin with this handsome native person.
What were your parents' names? I don't think we got that.
My mother's name was Constance Stockton Wood, Deer, of course. My father's name was Joseph Deer, and then my siblings all had their names too: Joseph Edward Deer, Farrell Evelyn Deer, Robert Earl Deer. He's now passed on just almost a year ago now. We are very sad about that. And then my sister Constance Deer, but she's also Connie Deer. Everyone called my mother Connie.
So how did your parents influence you? First of all, what did your father do for a living?
My father worked in the lumber mill. That was the only employment for the tribe at that time.
This was a tribal concern?
Yes, it's a tribal entity, and anyone from the tribe, and others too, but mostly the tribal people, worked in the mill. He had a long record as a laborer there. He was there as a laborer for over 35 years, and that was hard work in the wintertime, being outdoors, piling lumber and doing other things out there. And my mother worked as a nurse for a while, but then she married and started having children, and so expressing herself at the time, she started questioning the termination policy and the termination of the tribe by the federal government, and that's quite a long story. But she started writing letters and...
explain to us what the termination policy is. What was?
Well, this country still is uncertain about people of color, especially the native people, and they've tried all kinds of procedures and policies and laws and practices to deal with the problem, starting with Columbus, who noted that the Arawak Indians who swam out to meet the boat were fine people, well built, and willingly gave everything that they owned to exchange and to show hospitality and friendship. And in his own log in the book, The People's History of the U.S. by Dr. Howard Zinn, and he went to other sources besides the usual sources that people consulted. In Columbus's own words, he said, with 50 men, we could make them do anything we want. So here the Indian people were, being friendly, hospitable, open, and generous, and he's busily calculating how he can boss them around and take over. And so we've had various perspectives. So that's the first big cultural clash with the native people that's noted in a number of books.
So your mother was interested in this termination policy.
Yes,
What did
yes.
that involve?
So the termination, just let me say, there was the reservation period where treaties were signed. Well, there were various treaties over a period of time, but we signed the treaty treaties during the treaty period in the 1850s, 1854. Our reservation was established as a treaty tribe, and that's really important to note because not every tribe has treaties. So we have the wise treaty chiefs who approved that. We didn't accept allotment, which meant that every individual in the tribes got a portion of land, and they were supposed to become farmers. Well, that didn't work. These people here, my tribal people, were hunters and gathered wild rice, and they fished, and farming wasn't the thing.
So they owned the whole reservation collectively?
Yes, it's a communal effort, and that's a very important distinction, so I'm glad that you noted that. I used to teach a course at the university, Current Issues in American Indian Affairs, and this is a whole course, so I'm just trying to give you the highlights here. So as a result, we kept our reservation as a total entity, and we signed away over 9.5 million acres of land during that time, which is a lot of land to give away to the government. Then, during the IRA period, Indian Reorganization Act, many tribes, their government structures were changed, and that's probably the beginning of the change in our government too, because Europeans were accustomed to having kings and queens telling people what to do and so on, and this is not the way of the tribes. They had chiefs, but there were clans, there were duties and powers that were dispersed across the people and among the people. At any rate, our tribe ended up, in my beginning knowledge of this, with the 12 members of the Menominee Indian Advisory Council, which was the governmental body. But then the power laid in the arms of the people. They had to meet from time to time with the whole tribe and get input and facts. Termination came after World War II. We were a federally recognized tribe from 1854 to 1954, when the Menominee Termination Act was passed, and that meant that the tribe was no longer a federally recognized tribe. We would be withdrawn from federal supervision, and that's another, I don't know if you want to go into all of that.
What was this was an act of Congress,
It was
right?
an act of Congress.
What were they trying to accomplish?
Well, to solve the Indian problem, And notice, I remind people, they've tried genocide, they've tried reservations, they've tried allotment, they've tried relocation. In the 50s, the idea was to relocate the Indians from the reservations and help them in the cities. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs had a program called relocation. So as a result of that, the idea was to have employment in the cities which was a good idea, but still people wanted to be Indians.
Did you know people who tried it?
Oh, yes. I remember one lady from my tribe. She left after termination because what happened, they abolished the tribal government. The land became subject to taxation. The hospital was closed. The tribal rolls were closed. It was a cultural, economic, political disaster. And this resulted in lots of people leaving voluntarily because the first thing that was done was they put in a private corporation called Menominee Enterprises, Inc., and there were many changes then. People didn't have any understanding of this at all.
Was this Enterprises, that was the successor of the former tribal government?
No, it only dealt with the aspect dealing with the forest.
Oh, okay.
I should say that the Menominees were the first tribe terminated, and they were the first tribe restored. And so we're a very famous tribe in the annals of political science, Indian law, history, and what we did was a very historic achievement, going from termination to restoration. But there are a few other things I wanted to explain about the origins of termination.
Go ahead.
There's a book called Drums, and this is by now Professor Nicholas Peroff, P-E-R-O-F-F, Menominee Drums, Tribal Termination and Restoration, 1854 to 1974. So I'm trying to tell you in a few sentences what he said in the book. Okay? And that also demonstrates that many people have very little knowledge of Indian history, Indian culture, Indian people, and they want simple two-sentence talking points. And so I'm trying to just distill down what some of these important points were. The Menominees had this forest. It was a sustained yield forest. That meant that you couldn't cut more than a certain amount of board feet. And so as a result of that very wise policy starting in the early 1900s, the forest has sustained the tribe all this time. It's very important to us to keep the forest. There was a big blowdown way back when. I'm not quite sure. I think it was sometime in the 30s or 40s. And the tribe wanted to sell the lumber. And the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who had control of overall the tribe, as it did then all the tribes under federal supervision, refused to do it. A long lawsuit was brought. The tribe was awarded $8.5 million. They thought then that we should have part of this as an individual payment, a per capita payment. And the Congressman, Melvin Laird at the time, introduced this as a simple per capita payment bill because almost everybody was poor in the tribe. And it was a thoughtful thing to, well, not just put all the money in the tribal treasury, but to let some of the individuals have it. Well, not some, the tribal members. Okay, gets over to the Senate. Senator Arthur V. Watkins, a member of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, said, well, if they wanted their money, well, the court had already awarded the money, they would have to agree to termination. And so, long story short, he did come out, talk with them, and waved the $1,500 in front of them. There was only a very small group of people at this meeting because they didn't understand how important it was.
What year are we talking about here?
We're talking about probably 1953, about that time, because the act was actually passed in 1954.
The per capita is $1,500.
Yes. I took my $1,500, put it in the bank, and used it to go to school.
Okay.
And other people did other things. But the point of it was Menominees did not have informed knowledge of this. And so they really didn't understand what they were voting for. 169 people voted for it, five people voted against it, and I don't even think that was a representative group or number, but that's what happened. And so he went around telling everyone in the Congress that was interested, although it was probably minimal interest at that time in Indians, that the Menominees had consented to this. Well, the Menominees later on, a few weeks later, they said, wait, now let's look at this and see what's happening and try to understand this. Well, then about 800 people signed a petition protesting this, and they sent it into Washington. Well, of course, it then got lost, or nobody paid any attention to it. And the senator then said, well, the Menominees had consented. So the Congress thought that the Menominees had consented to it, but they hadn't really.
So they passed the law anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, so it was a terrible time for the tribe. And
How did it affect your family? How did it affect people you know, particularly?
well, my mother was protesting this, saying that the treaties were not being upheld, and this was not what people wanted to have out there. And so she actually got fired from her job at the hospital as a nurse. People could not obtain health care. It was terrible. No health care, no education, nothing. Everyone was out on their own.
Things they had before
Yeah.
through their tribal
Yes.
offices are now gone.
Yeah. And so in my family, my sister, Connie, she was in her last year of, I think it was about her last year of school. Actually, the act was passed in 1954, but it wasn't finalized until 1961 because no one had ever done this before, and the state government, they didn't know either. So they formed the Menominee Indian Study Committee, and I'm not quite sure what they all studied, but still.
It was part of a larger effort that they were kind of trying this out on the Menominee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I was a social worker, and we don't make a lot of money in this society. And so I told her, when she told me she had to drop out because she didn't have any money, I said, you are not dropping out. No, I will see to that. And so I myself paid most of her expenses for her last year in college. So, and many other people suffered a lot. By that I mean they didn't have medical care. They just didn't have medical care. The Medical Society of Wisconsin was so concerned about the poor health conditions that they lobbied to get money for the treatment of, and TB was one of the diseases, and just medical care. Mm-hmm. So we could spend a lot of time on that, but I know we want to get to other things too.
I'd be interested to know how you went into social work. I understand your mother was a great influence on you. Is that why you went into social work?
Well, I liked people, and my mother was the greatest influence in my life, and I want people to understand too that there are various people that influence you. Sometimes it's your parents, sometimes it's your friends or your pastors or priests or whoever. And she came from a Quaker background.
Oh.
And my father was put in the Catholic boarding school when he was about 10 because his mother died in the flu epidemic, and his father couldn't care for the children.
Was that off the reservation?
No, on the reservation.
On the
It was a Catholic
reservation.
boarding school. The Catholics came in with the voyageurs, French voyageurs, Jean Nicolet. I don't have a French. We have French blood in us, but we're not schooled in the French language. So even today, you have the French influence there on our reservation. We have the names of Beaupre and Greeno and Turtelot, and of course Menominee names too.
Uh-huh.
So when I was under 10, I know this. I was calculating it. My mother told me that, Ada dear, you're an Indian. And I said, okay, okay, Mom, if you say so. Children are generally obedient to their parents, and help was not a foreign concept to me. I was the oldest of 5, and that was a lot of work in a one-room log cabin with no water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. We had an outhouse. And she thought this was an adventuresome way to live. I'm this little kid, and I'm thinking, I'm not doing this as an adult, because every day took a long time to accomplish the tasks. You have to go down to the river, haul the water up, but we had a pump too. But wash clothes, you had to get a lot of water to wash the clothes. It was a washboard, and
Heating with wood, I suppose.
yes, we had a wood stove, and my father
Cooking with it.
Yes, wood cook stove and a wood heating stove, and of course lots of people like to camp out in the wilderness. And now, of course they have nice houses in the city or wherever, but I did my camping early in life. So At any rate, when I received the tribal scholarship, I was really appreciative of it. My mother had this interest in Indians and the government and so on, and so she took us to the general meetings, and I was fascinated as a little youngster. I'm looking around and seeing all these adults, and of course we always had food. Food is always important. The lunch, but they were all talking and carrying on conversations about, I know it was adult, stuff. And later on, when I was in grade school, my mother said, well, would you like to go to the advisory council meetings? I said, okay. So I had braids, and I had little glasses, and I had my little books. And so I'm this little kid going to this meeting of the Tribal Advisory Council. And these were all married men and Catholic men. And so, of course, they all had their large families, but there I am. And I thought it was interesting. I didn't understand all the words. Some of them were quite large. And I'd write them down. And I said, wow, this is really interesting. And then later on, when I graduated from Shawano High School, I got this letter from the Menominee tribe at that point, stating that I had been awarded the tribal scholarship. And I was really surprised, because I'd been thinking, well, maybe I'll join the WACS, or maybe I'll go to Haskell. It's now called Haskell Nations Indian University. And then I got this letter, and I said, wow, this is great. It was $1,000 a year, which is a lot of money at that point. And in reflecting on this, I thought, wow, this is great, but any one of them could have given it to one of their children. But they noticed me.
There was somebody scribbling down all the words.
Yeah, and my father was well regarded, like most people were well regarded at that point. He worked in the lumber mill, and he hunted and he fished, and like lots of people did, And so I like to tell people nowadays that for a $3,000 investment, because by the time I graduated, they had taken that money away, but they had arranged for money from the state to come in for some of us. There are very few of us that went on to college at that point. And I'm very happy to say that I looked into this once to see how many, or who were the first people that graduated. And there was this list produced by the university a number of years ago. Long list. There weren't that many Indians, so I don't know how they calculated it. But anyway, my colleague, Dr. Robert Paulus, he is Oneida, and his field is education. He's the first Indian male to graduate from UW-Madison, and I'm the first Indian female, because there's one other person ahead of me on this list, but nobody ever heard of her. She hasn't been active, so for all intents and purposes, I feel that I'm the first American Indian woman to graduate from UW-Madison.
You had a degree in social work, and what year was that?
You asked me how I became a social worker. Well, first I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
And I thought, well, and somebody said, "What, don't you want to be a nurse?" I said, no. I said, I'd rather be a doctor, but I don't have the talent for that. I'm not good in science. And I hardly got through high school algebra and high school geometry. Everything else was a piece of cake. At any rate, I get to the university and I signed up for the pre-med, and I started having trouble in the very first weeks with algebra and with chemistry. I said, well, I have to change. And so I took 3 years of wonderful liberal arts at fabulous university, and I was awed by the knowledge of the professors there. I'm sitting there thinking, wow, they have all this knowledge about all these topics and all these subjects. And so I started asking about people. Well, how do you get to be a professor? What do they do? How do they study? And so on. Or what did they study? They said, well, I wasn't for it. They get a bachelor's degree, they get master's degrees, they get a doctorate degree, and they research. And I said, oh, okay. So I decided when I was a freshman that I was going to get a master's degree. And I took all these fabulous courses at the university: integrated liberal studies and American studies. And my senior year, I decided, well, I have to decide. So my advisor, who formed a wonderful relationship with me, he was a rural sociology professor, and Dr. John Barton. He said, well, Ada, you're good with people. So you should think about social work. I thought, well, I had met some good social workers. They were friendly. They were always putting me on some committee, and they were asking me if I sent me off to camp. They gave me scholarships to go to camp, and I thought, wow, okay, So, and I know that social workers helped people. I have this help gene in me, and it's been a wonderful life as a social worker.
I read a quote from your mother in some of the articles I read about you that you're not put here to take up space and breathe air. You're here to help members of your tribe in the larger world.
That's right. And I remember sitting there thinking, listening to the professors, that someday I hope to repay the tribe. See, this is very important, to be a member of a tribe, a member of a community, because we're all humans on the planet, and to receive from the community, but also to give back to the community. And if the tribe hadn't awarded me that scholarship, I would not have been able to come to the University of Wisconsin, because we couldn't have afforded it, And so the tribes touched the lives of all their members with the tribal laws, with the practices of the culture, and being in the communities, powwows. There's the whole configuration of all these areas that affect people. And so I feel now, after all these years, that I finally can say that I think I've repaid the tribe for their initial $3,000 investment in me.
So you went right to graduate school, is that correct?
Oh yes, I decided early in life, I am not going to be poor. No one is going to give me anything. And so I didn't know all the information about scholarships, but I know I'm going to do what I can at this. And so I studied all the time, every year, since 6th grade. I took my books home, and I love books. You see, I've got all my books.
You came prepared.
I've got many books with me. Menominee drums. I got Freedom with Reservation. This is a drawn picture based on a photograph of Chief Oshkosh. He received a top hat and an overcoat from the governor at that time, and put this on over his Indian clothing. And you can see the presidential medal there. It's a medal of peace and friendship. There was always this reciprocity, and there was lots of rituals when treaties were signed. And legend says that he would go among the people into the villages and say, "Don't I look awful? This is how the white man's law fits the Indian."
No, I understand Oshkosh is the one who managed to preserve a piece of the Menominee land as a reservation.
Yes. The treaties were signed in 1854, and he was still alive then. So, yeah, and he also resisted. Leadership has been a very strong trait among Indian people, and one of the professors that I have met over the years is Dr. David Rohn from, he's taught at Oshkosh. He was very interested in Indians, and he said he's especially interested in the Menominees. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, because my tribe had always resisted the policies of the government, and whenever there was a crisis, leadership arose from the people. And I think that was a beautiful way for him to state this and to observe it, especially as a non-Indian person. But he's this wonderful historian. And so I started thinking about it. Well, we got treaties. We resisted allotment. We kept our land together. We had a tribal government that functioned, whereas many tribes today, due to the IRA, Indian Reorganization Act efforts, were practically forced to adopt new structures of government. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs, John Collier, was a very sympathetic man, and he felt that all the previous policies had not worked, putting Indians in the boarding schools and allotting the land and discouraging the culture. And so we had our advisory council, and then termination came where they abolished the tribal government, installed this corporation And most people didn't understand that. And then we resisted. They started selling our land, and I'm just really giving you just the bare bones here. And when they started selling our land, the people got really upset about this.
This is the Legend Lake project?
Yes, and they cut the trees down at our most beautiful lake, the Kashina Lake. It's now part of the complex. And they didn't tell them. See, you had the corporation board of directors, you had a board of trustees, you had the power of the Wisconsin Trust Company of Milwaukee that administered the affairs or took the vote of the tribe. Let me say that when termination occurred, every Menominee became a certificate holder, every adult Menominee. And about